Ever wished you could teleport anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye? Or just vanish from that boring meeting you never wanted to be in? Well, that's exactly how life works for David Rice, the jumper who lives without limits. David Rice is just a regular teenager in Ann Arbor, Michigan. At school, he's got a crush on his friend Millie. One day, he gives her a snow globe as a gift, but the moment's ruined by Mark, a classmate, who snatches it from Millie's hands and hurls it onto a frozen lake. David tries to get it back, stepping onto the ice, but it cracks beneath him, and he plunges into the freezing water. Millie panics and rushes to help, but David is trapped under the sheet of ice, dragged away by the current. In a desperate moment, something incredible happens. He teleports into the hallway of a public library. Confused and terrified, David slips out, trying not to be noticed. When he gets home, his father, William, is furious about how late he is. David lives alone with his dad, a man who's distant, abusive, and neglectful. His mom, Mary, walked out when he was just 5, without a word of explanation. When his dad demands to know where he's been, David ignores him and locks himself in his room. But William forces the door, and just as he bursts in, David vanishes, reappearing inside the library. That's when David realizes the truth. He has an extraordinary gift. He can teleport to any place he's seen or imagined. Testing his new power, David quickly figures out he can use it to escape his miserable life. He runs away from home and decides to start over in New York. But before leaving, he sneaks by Millie's house and leaves the snow globe for her. Armed with a travel guide, David studies landmarks all over the world to sharpen his skill. When he sees a picture of the Empire State Building, it reminds him of his mom. Objects in his room start flying, and suddenly he jumps to the top of the Empire State. That's when he learns he can only teleport to places he's already been. With no money to his name, David tests his ability inside a bank. He asks to use the restroom, but on the way, he carefully studies the vault. That night, he cleverly teleports inside and steals stacks of cash. The next morning, investigators arrive. Roland Cox, who claims to work for the government, demands all security footage of everyone who entered or left the bank. With no signs of a break-in, local cops are clueless. But Cox seems to know exactly what's going on. Years go by. Now David lives in luxury in a Manhattan high-rise. Over time, he's stolen money from across the globe, piling his apartment with cash-packed boxes. His wall is covered with photos of places he's jumped to, a scrapbook of adventures. One night in London, he steps into a bar to unwind and spots a woman who catches his eye. Without hesitation, he teleports right beside her, drawing the attention of Griffin. Soon after, David leaves with the girl. And the next morning he vanishes from her bed, reappearing in Fiji, catching waves. In a tropical jungle somewhere in the world, a jumper blinks through the trees, teleporting again and again, until he's suddenly caught by an electrostatic cable. Roland steps out of the shadows and executes him, convinced that people like this are freaks that should never exist. Moments later, Roland gets a call about the bank heist David pulled years ago, and it leads him straight to the young man's trail. David arrives at his apartment, only to find Cox waiting inside. Roland says he's there to investigate a bank robbery, but makes it clear he's not the police. He asks how David managed to rob a vault without even opening the doors. When David tries to push him out, Roland shocks him with a stun baton. Struggling to jump, David is struck again, this time pinned down by one of Roland's power cables. But with a final effort, he manages to teleport into the room where he hides all his cash. He cuts the cable, grabs a bag full of money, and escapes. But the jump lands him back in his old bedroom, the house where he once lived with his father. William hears the noise and rushes in. He begs David to stay, confessing he's been losing his mind ever since his son vanished. David insists he's not crazy. But as William bursts through the door, his son vanishes again. Meanwhile, Roland begins recruiting teams to track David down. Unaware, David lingers in his old hometown. When he visits Millie's house, he learns she's working at a bar and decides to stop by. Inside, David runs into Mark, the bully who tormented him as a kid. Mark pushes too far and a fight breaks out. In an instant, David drags Mark through a jump straight into a bank vault, leaving him locked inside. Back at the bar, David and Millie talk. He says he works at a bank, and when he asks about her, she admits she still dreams of seeing Rome someday, so David asks if she'd like to travel with him. Confused, Millie eventually agrees. In Rome, the two explore the Colosseum, with David showing off his powers. But Cox is gathering intel, questioning Mark while posing as a cop. Mark, now on trial, slips, and Cox learns that David's gone to Rome. At the Colosseum, David and Millie don't realize they're being followed by Griffin. At one point, David leaves Millie to force open a locked door and runs right into him. Griffin reveals he has the same abilities, that they're both called jumpers. He scolds David for being reckless with his powers and warns him. A secret order known as the Paladins has hunted their kind for centuries, and they won't stop until every jumper is dead. But right in the middle of his explanation, a group of Paladins storms the Colosseum and a fight breaks out. David is caught by one of them and realizes he can't jump after being electrocuted. Griffin on his own takes the Paladins down fast. As he helps David back on his feet, he explains he's been hunting every Paladin that's been tracking them. Moments later, Griffin jumps to his hideout, but this time David manages to follow through Griffin's energy trail, what they call a jump scar. The two talk and Griffin warns David to hurry back and get Millie. Back at the Colosseum, David and Millie make their way out. Millie's confused, angry, demanding answers. Before David can explain, the police arrest him for breaking into the Colosseum. At the station, David claims he's just a tourist and apologizes for breaking the law. The chief warns him he'll only be released once the U.S. Embassy clears it. Alone in the room, David is startled when a woman walks in. It's Mary, his mother. She tells him he has 30 seconds before Paladins arrive to kill him and slips him the keys to his cuffs. She runs off, and when David tries to follow, he stumbles and loses her in the crowd. Soon after, he finds Millie, and together they head to the airport. But David admits she has to leave without him. Hurt, Millie continues her trip alone. Meanwhile, Roland is chasing leads on David. He tracks down William, who bitterly reveals David abandoned him 8 years ago, and he hasn't heard from him or from Mary ever since. When Roland orders him to leave, William refuses. David meets up with Griffin again. Looking around his hideout, he sees walls covered with intel and photos of Paladins. David presses for answers. Griffin explains they're religious fanatics who believe these powers belong only to God, and that this war has raged since the Dark Ages. He warns David the Paladins aren't merciful. They'll hurt anyone to get to him. For the first time, David grasps the danger, facing both his father and Millie. When David goes home, he finds his father unconscious and rushes him to the hospital. Desperate, he seeks Griffin again, demanding to know where Cox is so he can finish him. But Griffin insists it's impossible. He's been chasing Cox for over a decade, and every time he finds him, he walks away with another scar. David offers to team up, but Griffin refuses and jumps off to China. Relentless, David follows, trying to convince him. When he reveals he knows Cox's location, Griffin finally agrees. As David goes after Millie, Griffin heads back to his base to load up his weapons. When David finds Millie, she's still furious from their last encounter. But when Cox suddenly shows up, David realizes he has no choice but to tell her the truth. He reveals he's a jumper, and Millie, shocked, watches his powers unfold before her eyes. She panics and tries to run, but David grabs Millie and jumps straight to Griffin's hideout. Cox storms into the apartment and finds it empty, but he spots the jump scar and quickly sets up gear to open a portal, determined to track David. Back at the hideout, Griffin is furious to see Millie with them and warns about the box the Paladins have. He says bringing her was a mistake, that it could be the end of them all. The two check the jump scar and see it's almost complete. Seconds later, Roland steps through. David and Griffin duck for cover, but David spots a photo of Mary on the wall and is suddenly slammed by Cox, pinned against it. Griffin charges in, unleashing a flamethrower at Cox, and the two clash. But with Paladin tech on his side, Roland holds his ground. Griffin finally strikes Cox and drags him out. He jumps away and reappears inside a bus, charging straight at Roland, who narrowly dodges the hit. Millie reaches David and tries to help him when Cox comes back at her. But Griffin bursts in again, flamethrower blazing, blasting Roland and yanking him into Millie's apartment. Griffin leaps after him, and the two throw down once more. Soon after, Griffin returns to the hideout with the Paladin's box, where David and Millie talk. She admits she just wants her life back, but then Millie is yanked into the scar by a cable. Griffin quickly rigs a bomb to wipe out every Paladin in the apartment. David, desperate to protect her, refuses the plan. The two fight over the detonator, teleporting across the globe in a whirlwind battle. David finally wins, returning without the bomb. But before he can save Millie, Paladins swarm him, striking and chaining him down again. He fights back, but each jump tears the apartment apart piece by piece. Focusing every ounce of power, David pulls off the impossible, teleporting the entire apartment into the lake where he first discovered his gift. The Paladins drown, and David, nearly drained, jumps to the library, only to realize Cox is still alive. Without hesitation, David teleports him to a remote place. No way out, no return. Time passes, and David finally finds his mother. When they meet, he learns Mary is also a Paladin. She confesses she left the family because she knew David was a jumper, and that it would put him in danger. But instead of killing him like the others would have, she walked away, giving him a chance to survive. Mary warns him Roland won't quit so easily, and that danger still looms. Even so, David chooses to move forward with his life, more aware than ever of what he's up against. He leaves with Millie, knowing the fight is far from over, and that's today's movie. Drop your thoughts down below. I'm Gustavo Marquez, signing off for now. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.